It's a new year, which means we have a new shot at improving as writers. These are 23 things you might be doing wrong that might be holding your progress back. Number 1, you aren't allowing yourself to fail. Failure is such an important part of becoming a better writer. However, failure is not a pleasant part of writing, so a lot of writers avoid failing on purpose. However, failure is where we see improvement. Allowing ourselves to fail is a freeing part of the writing process. It shows that we trust ourselves as writers and as editors. Number 2, you're setting unrealistic standards for yourself. If you just started writing last year, it's not realistic for you to have found your writing style in 2023. If you've never written a full-length novel before and focus more on short stories, it's unrealistic for you to expect that your first novel is going to be flawless on the first run. Writers can have high expectations, and that can be helpful in some cases and detrimental in others. Make sure that the standards that you're setting for yourself are flexible and within your level as a writer. Otherwise, you can set yourself up for disappointment. Number 3, you don't trust yourself as a writer. Learning to trust yourself as a writer is one of the most important things you can do. However, a lot of writers, whether it's for perfectionism, which we'll talk about, whether it's because you fear failure, which we just talked about, don't trust themselves. They don't want to make mistakes because it's too hard to fix those mistakes, or they don't believe they can fix those mistakes at all. If you don't trust yourself as a writer, it's going to be harder and harder to improve and to keep sustainability in your craft. Number 4, you haven't practiced as an editor. A lot of writers don't want to make mistakes, or they keep holding themselves back in their process because they don't believe in themselves as editors. The thing is, to get better at editing, you actually have to practice editing, and to practice editing, you have to make mistakes in your work. I know it's hard, but if you can, practice editing some of your old work. If you have a friend that you can swap work with, practice editing theirs. I used to beta read a lot, and that was really useful to me before I went to my writing degree. Editing is a skill, and all skills require practice. You aren't going to be a perfect editor on the first go. Nobody's expecting that, but to get better at a skill, you do have to practice. Number 5, you're judging your work instead of accepting it. We can be our own worst critics as writers. Oftentimes, it's easier for us to judge our work, especially if we judge it before other people do. It's a skill to learn how to accept your work even if you're not happy with it. I'll let you in on a secret. Accepting my work rather than judging it is the number 1 thing that improved my writing over the last couple of years. Learning to accept where I'm at instead of being upset that I'm not perfect has been a lot more productive for me. Writing is something we get better at over time. Therefore, it can be unproductive to just constantly judge our work when we need to have that acceptance, that patience in order to see overall growth. Number 6, you aren't actively building a process that works for you. As a writer, learning to build your own process can be a huge battle. If you're caught up in the online writing community, it can be even harder because you're constantly being told different things, such as you need to outline or you should pants your work instead. Writers are going to constantly hear the voices of other people, and one of the most important things you can do as a writer is figuring out what actually works for your process. Some people want to write frequently and fast, like myself, and other people want to take their time. Sometimes this changes project to project. Writing is hard, so in order to make it sustainable, you have to enjoy the process. Number 7, you aren't identifying your strengths and are only focusing on your weaknesses. If you don't identify your strengths, you're more likely to generalize where you're at in your writing journey. This might also lead to underselling strengths that could actually help you with your weaknesses. If you're bad at world building but good at description, you've already developed an adjacent skill that'll help you with world building. For example, the detailed and consistent eye you need for descriptions can help you practice your world building skills. This is why it's so important to also focus on your strengths. If you're only focusing on the things that you're bad at, you might be missing the things that you're good at that could help you fix the things that you're bad at. Number 8, you aren't writing what you love. If you are constantly writing projects that don't bring you happiness, that you are not passionate about, it is going to be so much harder to stick with it. I've written a lot of books, and I've also spent many years writing projects that I didn't really like. I wish I'd just taken some time to tweak them so that they fit what I currently wanted out of writing better. It would have made me a lot less miserable and a lot more motivated. Number 9, you're putting the opinion of others above your own. Listening to feedback is so important as a writer, but the thing about writers is you're going to constantly hear feedback from other people. If you're in a workshop, you're going to be getting critique. If you have a critique partner, you're going to be getting critique. If you're seeking beta readers, and finally, of course, when you're getting reviews, you're going to be getting critiqued. Listening to the opinion of others can be helpful. I'm not negating that. But this year, why don't you try listening to your opinion first. Sometimes writers have a tendency to alter what their instincts were telling them to do because they think it might be received better or other people might judge them for their impulses. Learning to listen to your voice is, again, a skill. As writers, we're taught pretty much from the get-go not to listen to ourselves. It's always, you gotta think about an audience. And while these things are really important, especially if you plan to publish, you don't need to be thinking about them at all times. In fact, I believe that you'll have a more successful time publishing your work if you trust yourself first, if you believe in your opinions first. This is because when you value your own opinion as a writer, it's going to be easier to deal with things such as rejections or critique. It'll also allow you to filter critique through your intention, which would be harder to do if you were putting the opinions of others way above your own. Number 10, you're writing for other people rather than yourself. Similar to the last point, a lot of writers begin writing because they want people to like their work. They want their work to be read. They yearn for a community. When I first started writing, this was one of the most important things to me. I wanted a fan base. I wanted people who knew about my characters. Having an audience in mind is not a bad thing. I want to stress that. However, some writers go into writing with just an audience in mind and don't think about what they themselves want. If this sounds like you, perhaps try writing for yourself first and foremost. I do have a full video on why you might want to write for yourself, which I will link in the description. Writing for yourself doesn't mean you never want to publish your work or that you don't want to share the work that you're writing personally. It just means that you're taking the time to develop the things that you personally like without worrying about an audience in the back of your mind. This can help develop your confidence over time, which is especially helpful for when you do want to publish your work. You have a really strong foundation that you can then share rather than publishing your work when you're kind of rocky with your relationship with your own writing. Number 11, you haven't pushed out of your comfort zone productively. If you're making too big of a goal with your writing, that could be a problem. For example, you've only ever written poems, but now you want to write an award-winning novel. That is a really large goal that might not set you up for success on the first go. Of course, writing a novel when you've only written poetry is a great way to push out of your comfort zone. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that jumping off the deep end like that is a productive way to push out of your comfort zone. I might suggest creating more realistic expectations like we talked about earlier. So instead of writing an award-winning novel, maybe you just want to complete a first draft. It doesn't matter if it's messy. There's also a second part to this point. If you're not trying at all to push outside of your comfort zone, that can become a problem. Some writers do totally well writing within their comfort zone for the rest of their lives, so this might not apply to you. However, if you do feel like you're stagnating, take a look at what you're writing. Are you writing the same thing with the same characters and the same point of view and the same tense? Can you switch something up? Pushing out of our comfort zone allows us to adapt, and adapting helps us develop skills we didn't have before. Trying new things also gives us an opportunity to make mistakes, and guess what? You learn when you make mistakes. Number 12, you haven't developed a writing self-care routine. A writer in media can sometimes be seen as brooding, mysterious, sometimes depressed, and I'm not sure about you guys, but when I started writing, I kind of embodied this. I thought to be an artist, you have to be a bit tortured. Not true. You could take care of yourself and be equally, if not more, productive. For example, I love making a spectacle out of rereading my work. I get the robot word voices to read it to me, I get tea, I get snacks, and I really enjoy the process. I also try to do this frequently, so my writing and I are connected and I'm feeling good about it. Maybe you need to make mood boards or playlists, something that helps you take care of yourself as a writer. The reason I recommend doing this is because writing is hard, and it's great to take care of ourselves when things are difficult. Writing is also an isolating task. You're doing it by yourself. You might collaborate here and there, but most of the time it's going to be a solitary act. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself and actually enjoying the process can make the writing process more sustainable. Number 13, you haven't learned to let things go. I am an advocate for finishing projects, but sometimes a project just does not work and it is causing you more anguish than it's providing good. Sometimes it's important to learn to let things go if a project isn't working, or if you're not happy with a scene, move on from it and come back later. Learning to not be so precious about my work has been really helpful in making sure I'm taking care of myself, because constantly being upset about my writing or feeling like I'm not getting anywhere was one of the worst things for my process. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough. The moment that I realized I could let things go, I didn't have to stick to my original vision for things, is when I started to improve a lot more rapidly. Number Number 14, perfectionism has become more important than writing itself. As an ex-perfectionist, if you're a perfectionist watching this, I totally get it. I have a really detailed ask talking about my journey with perfectionism, and I will make a video on it, but I will link that in the meantime. Perfectionism can be really difficult, especially if you struggle with drafting anxiety. Sometimes this isn't your fault, but there is a way you can fix it. A major reason why I wasn't writing very much is because perfectionism was becoming way more important to me than the actual act of writing itself. I couldn't make mistakes. I wanted everything to be perfect on the first go, and instead of focusing on the actual writing itself, I was focusing on perfecting it. It's a lose-lose situation, so if you haven't tackled your perfectionism yet, this might be the time to start. Number 15, you're consuming too much writing advice instead of practicing for yourself. Now, this is a really meta point. Obviously, this is a writing advice video, and as somebody who likes writing advice, who makes writing advice, and who consumes writing advice, I understand the value. However, a lot of the time, consuming writing advice can act as a crutch. If I'm consuming writing advice all the time, I don't really need to practice my own writing because I'm learning through a different source, aren't I? One of the best things you can do to get better at writing is actually writing. In my opinion, it's the only way you can get better at writing. If you find yourself reading or consuming a lot more writing advice than you are actually writing, it might be time to take a step back and focus more on your own process rather than listening to the words of others. Number 16, you haven't developed a fair critical eye for your work. I'm just gonna say it, most writers initially turn into mean editors. Raise your hand if you are a writer and you thought, okay, well, I'm a good editor because I'm being really harsh on this piece of work. I'm giving my all. I'm critiquing everything I see. Raise your hand, because I've been there, let's be honest here. It's instinct, especially when you're a beginner writer, to be a lot more critical about all the writing you see, to look at published work and dissect all of the problems, but not necessarily in a productive way, to critique things that you weren't asked to critique, for example. I've been there, I've done all of those things. Writers can actually do this with their own work, but it can be seen as insidious, since a lot of writers struggle with confidence in their work anyway. You might not even notice if you're being overly critical to your work. Of course, developing a critical eye is important. You want to be able to self-edit your work. However, if your critical eye is not fair, that could be a problem. If you're constantly pointing out every tiny little error, you might not actually be able to progress. This is because your brain can't stop seeing your work as something to be torn apart. Number 17, you're focused too much on the end product rather than the process. I get it, writing a book is annoying. Sometimes we just want it to be done. Why can't I just wake up and the book is done? That's what I say to myself every single time I write my book because writing is hard. However, focusing too much on the end product can make you lose sight of the journey. It can be much harder to give yourself the leeway you need to make mistakes, to grow as you go. If you find yourself constantly thinking way ahead to the book cover when you haven't even written the first chapter, for example, to the book deal when you haven't even started drafting, it might be a good idea to write down those ideas, get the excitement out, and then move past it. Really focus on the actual process. It's exciting to think about a potential book deal or a potential movie deal. However, if we get ahead of ourselves, it can lead us to unfair disappointment when those things don't happen immediately. Number 18, you haven't found a supportive writing community. Being a writer is really hard. That is the theme of this video. If you don't have another writer friend, even if it's just one or two people, whether in person or online, it can be really difficult to continue with writing when things get hard. I know if I didn't have my support network, it would be difficult for me to feel motivated when things get tough in writing. Now, you don't want to rely solely on other people to keep you going, but it's great to develop a community of writers that you can trust, that you can talk to when things are going well or when things aren't going well. You can start making a community in the comments. Say hello, meet each other, introduce yourselves. What are you writing? What are you looking for in a buddy? If you have social media, link them down below. Number 19, you aren't trying new things. It doesn't hurt to try new things. For example, I'm a fiction writer and I didn't write poetry at all. When I got to university, I had to write poetry. I was like, I don't really want to do this. And guess what? Now I'm a poet, and also my poetry informs my fiction. I think a mistake a writer can make is just holding themselves into a one type of writer. If you write adult literary fiction, like I used to do frequently, and you're like, I'll never go back to YA, I'll never write YA ever again because I'm writing adult literary fiction for the rest of my life. This is literally a true story. You can unknowingly pigeonhole yourself, and that can make you miss out on fantastic things you can learn by branching out. I had to write a YA opening a couple of months ago for a class, and I learned so much about writing. I've learned so much switching genres. I started writing a fantasy novel after never reading or writing fantasy my whole life. I've learned so much during this process that I never would have learned had I continued just to stick with one thing. So try out new techniques, genres, ideas. It doesn't have to be long form. Just throw yourself into an idea for an hour and see what comes of it. Number 20, you're expecting improvement to come to you. Repeat after me. You create improvement. It does not just happen. If you feel like you haven't been improving at all, perhaps it's because this isn't something you've actively been doing. And it makes a lot of sense. You think just because years are passing and you are writing like frequently or so, that improvement should just naturally come to you. But writing is one of those things you have to constantly work at. If you aren't pushing yourself out of your comfort zone productively, if you aren't trying new things productively, if you aren't self-editing your work, if you aren't developing a kind critical eye, you might not be seeing the improvement that you want to see. And that's because improvement is something you create. This is also encouragement if you feel like you haven't been improving lately. If you're practicing frequently, if you are doing some of the other things I mentioned in this video, sometimes you just have to give it time. Improvement is something that will happen over time, and it's not something that will come to you by itself, though. You do have to put the work into making it happen. Number 21, you aren't honest about why you're struggling with writing. A lot of people can do this unintentionally. If you're saying writing is just not working at all for me because I just suck at writing, that could actually be untrue. For example, instead, you could say, my life is really busy right now because of XYZ. So it makes a lot of sense that I haven't had time to consistently write like I want to. Or if you say this scene just sucks, it's not working out, maybe instead you could say, I'm feeling overwhelmed with the scene right now. Sometimes writers have a tendency to be a little bit fatalistic. It's good. Sometimes we need the melodrama in our lives. However, it's also healthy to more specifically address why you might be having an issue with your writing. I will link a blog post that people seem to really like that I wrote on Tumblr called Things to Say Instead of My Writing is So Bad. And this is a specific list of problems that you might actually be having that you're instead describing as my writing is so bad. When in reality, it could be the descriptions here are really unspecific and it's not making me excited about the prose. Or I feel like I've repeated this beat already, so I'm not feeling excited about this scene right now. Taking a minute to be honest about why you're really struggling can go a really long way because it shows your brain that there's a specific problem. And if you have a specific problem, you can find a specific solution to fix it. Number 22, you're not productively problem solving. If you haven't written in months, the solution is not to yell at yourself or get angry at yourself. Instead, the solution is to create a manageable goal, like for example, writing a sentence every single day until the writing muscle gets back into use. Writers can be really hard on themselves and you don't have to be. It's okay for things to be difficult, and it's also okay for you to take some time to brainstorm healthier ways to help you through the process. And number 23, you're not taking enough time to rest. Say it with me. Writing is so hard. Sometimes a lot of the issues we're having with writing is because we're tired. We're busy with life. We're busy with school, or we've written a lot in the last couple of months and we're burning out. Maybe we're just not feeling connected to our work at this moment and we just need some time to take a break. Prioritize the moments when your body is telling you something. Sometimes it's more productive to take the rest you need rather than pushing through on empty until eventually you break down completely. So those are 23 reasons why you're still a bad writer in 2023. Let me end this video by saying I don't think there's any such thing as a bad writer because writing is subjective, so that would be silly of me to say. Let me know which one was your favorite tip in the comments below, but for now, I will see you guys in another video. Bye.